Welcome to Faith and Lit, a podcast exploring the intersection of books and belief. I'm your hostess with the mostest, Xandra Carroll. Our current series is Talking Tolkien, and I'm joined by my fellow book nerds, Kasey Leander and Dr. Simon Barry. This week, we're continuing our discussion on Tolkien's perspective of hope, perseverance, and keeping on keeping on. Let's join the guys.
And I love your references in your article to some of the Norse mythology where there's kind of a hope that's born actually out of the despair, and that the line between those is thin. It's massively important, but it is thin. It's not optimism that things are going to turn out well in the immediate term. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, obviously Tolkien was massively informed by the Norse culture and the Saxon culture that was so influenced by it. One of the things in the films that made me really happy is the extended soundtrack. When the Rohirrim charge, they're singing those lines from the Battle of Maldon, one of Tolkien's favourite poems. Hige shelfe hiadach, hiote the kinder, mod shelfe nacheth, the ure magen vitlast. Will shall be the sterner, heart shall be the bolder, spirit burn the brighter as our strength lessens. They're words of defiance, but they're not quite words of hope. And I think you look at the Edda, the Norse don't really have a lot of hope. Ragnarok is coming. Fenris Wolf is waiting in hell for Odin himself. Darkness is coming, and all you can do is spit in its eye as it devours you. Now, if the world is really that dark, then that's as good an attitude to have as any. But that's not Tolkien's attitude, or not the attitude of his heroes, and not his attitude. He's not saying, we're all going to die in misery, so at least be true to yourself and be defiant to the end. He's saying it may look like we're all going to die. It may look like the world is going to fall to darkness. But actually, good, not evil, is the ultimate principle of this universe. This story is not being told by the powers of evil. There are other powers at work in this world, Frodo, besides the will of evil. And it is what they will that will ultimately come to pass. So maybe you can't see any way for good to win. But keep doing the right thing anyway, because good will win. Maybe you don't see any way that there can be a good ending for you. But keep hoping. Because the author of the story knows a lot more about it than you do. And he's not going to let your ending be sad, not if you're one of his children. So it's a small dividing line, as you say, but it's hugely important. One is defiance based on despair and pride. One is hope based on trust and confidence.
Simon, thank you for this. This is like really rich. This is rich food. This is the Lemba spread of discussions on Tolkien. One small bite is enough to satisfy
the stomach of
a grown man. I wanted to make a comment on another RR, George R.R. Martin, or as I like to call him, R.R. the Lesser, because he, anyway, whatever. I have significant problems with, the way the TV show portrayed different sexual mores and stuff. But I think it's fascinating that George R.R. Martin's response and sort of a lot of his impetus for writing the Game of Thrones series came from him reacting against Tolkien and kind of saying, this is all too nice, it's all too perfect, like I want a gritty life. And in that sense, he's a little closer to Ragnarok than he is to the wedding supper of the Lamb that maybe Tolkien believed in was coming at the end of time. And so for you, Simon, when people are like, oh, hey, Lord of the Rings, it's too pretty, and I know we've hit on this in some ways, but I just really want you to stick a knife in the heart of that argument that RR would make, that Tolkien's world isn't gritty enough. It's not real enough. Yeah, like what's your quick response to that when people say that?
Well, I think one of them is to say which author fought in one of the most terrible wars in history and which author was a draft dodger who wrote for Disney. But that's a bit petty and a bit ad hominem. Let's be a bit fairer and go a little bit deeper. I think partly Martin is not trying to write fantasy, not as Tolkien wrote it. Because I think for Tolkien, fantasy, which he would have called mythopoetic writing, it's not quite its job to be realistic. It's its job to be applicable to reality. And those are not the same thing. And I think what Tolkien is envisaging mythopoetic writing as doing is crystallizing into a simple and visible and concrete form the hidden truths of our world and our existence. If you're familiar with the Plato's cave metaphor, where men are chained up in a cave with their backs to a fire and shapes move between them and the fire and cast shadows on the wall. And the idea is that the wall is our reality and the shadows are the forms, the fundamental realities behind it. The job of mythopoetic writing is to give you a mirror, to see those forms more clearly, to see the truths of our reality in a more concrete form, a more discrete, more visible, more detectable form. So we said this with the Nazgul. The Nazgul are brought down, they reach for power, and in so doing become slaves. They reach for immortality, and in so doing become trapped in death as Raifs. How often do we see those truths in our world? That men reach for power, and it masters them. That people cling to life, and in so doing they crush everything that makes it worth living out. The One Ring itself, it offers you huge power, but whatever is done with it turns to evil. How often do we see that when people reach for power the wrong way? Those revolutions of the last few centuries where people wanted power to free the peasants, to save the people, and they ended up with a far more cruel and oppressive regime than the one they replaced. The Bolsheviks, the revolutions of Latin America, the revolution in France. We see these patterns again and again, but what Tolkien does is, rather than making us sit through long decades of history where it's hard to see them, he crystallizes them out into a simple, beautiful picture. It's applicable to everyday life because it's true. It's a truth about our world in a simple and visible form. So Tolkien's not trying to be completely realistic. He himself admits that in his introduction to the later editions of Lord of the Rings. But what he's trying to do is to be true to the deeper truths of reality. We're going to talk about this more in subsequent sessions, I know. And for Tolkien, perhaps the deepest truth you can say about our reality is that in the end, good will triumph.
Simon, thank you so much for that incredible insight. You know, as you were talking, I just had this thought in my mind. I'm thinking about some of the people who might be viewing this video right now and some of the things that they may be experiencing. It's been a wild year or even a couple of years. I mean, we've had a global pandemic and there's all kinds of crazy things going on with the stock market right now. And just, there are so many struggles, and I'm reflecting on conversations I've had with my friends where they've said something like, I just don't know how to keep going. And I'm wondering, what do you think Tolkien would say to those people about continuing on, about hope and about perseverance?
Thank you. That's obviously a little bit of, there's going to have to be a lot of supposition there as to what Tolkien would say. He was not a forthcoming man on personal matters by and large. But I do think that part of the reason there is such an emphasis on things like the stars and the beauty of creation in his work, I suspect it goes back to his time in the trenches, when, as you will know if you study the history of the First World War, that conflict, very concentrated as it was for 4 years in a very narrow strip of land, it blasted the very landscape. Some of that land still doesn't grow right 100 years later. And standing in this waste of mud and iron and corpses that man had made, the one bit of beauty Tolkien could see was the stars. And I just imagine him on night watch with the shells bursting in the distance, standing or sitting amidst the mud and looking up and seeing above it all, the stars still shine. And that's something that Sam's song in Cír Fongol captures brilliantly. When he's alone, he's lost Frodo, he's in Mordor, talk about a hopeless situation. I mean, he has no idea what he's doing. He's stuck in a tower full of dead orcs in the middle of Sauron's power. And he just sits down and sings this little song. In western lands beneath the sun, the flowers may rise in spring. The trees may bud, the waters run, the merry finches sing. Or there may be 'tis cloudless night, and swaying birches bear the elven stars as jewels white amidst their branching hair. Lo here at journey's end I lie, in darkness buried deep, beyond all towers strong and high, beyond all mountains steep, above all shadows rides the sun, and stars forever dwell. I will not say the day is done, nor bid the stars farewell. I think one of the pieces of advice Tolkien would give at the moment is find the stars. Find the bit of beauty that you can see. It might literally be the stars. If you live in the UK like me, those are almost entirely obscured by cloud most of the time, and you have to look somewhere else for your beauty. But so a fortnight ago, I went for a walk in the snow. We had some snowfall. I was staying in Oxfordshire, West Oxfordshire, and I walked into a churchyard. It was actually the church I grew up going to. And that church is almost 1,000 years old now. And there's been a settlement on that site for perhaps 1,500 years. And it was a very dark, grey day. And I walked into the churchyard, and there in the shadow of these ancient broken down tombstones, amidst the snowdrops were blooming. And it was an incredible moment of beauty flowering in the shadow of death. Literally in the shadow of this tombstone, the snowdrops were bursting out amidst the snow. That was a star, if you like, a moment of beauty amidst the darkness. A reminder that actually for 1,500 years, through plague and war, far worse plagues than anything we've ever known, people have stood on this spot and kept the faith. And that in the shadow of death, beauty could be found blooming. Look to the stars. Look to beauty wherever you find it. It might be the stars themselves, as it often was for Tolkien. It might be the mountains and the seas. It might be, as it was for Beren, and indeed I think for Tolkien himself in 1916, human beauty. The beauty of Luthien in the story, the beauty of his wife Edith, who, in his own words, healed and slew the heart with new life. But look to beauty, because beauty tells us what the creator is like, just as the book tells you what the author is like. The beauty of the universe, Tolkien would say, is the fingerprints of the creator. And the better sense you get of the creator, the more you'll find Estelle. Because Estelle is the food of hope. And the food of Estelle is knowing the one in whom you can have trust or faith. And for Tolkien, one of the ways he found that was in the beauty of creation. Tolkien obviously was operating very much in the Christian tradition, the Roman Catholic tradition, which carries this idea of there being two books that reveal God. One of them, the book of Revelation, the Bible, and one of them, the book of creation, the natural world. And the beauty of creation was one way you could see what the creator, what the author was like. So when the world is very dark, and it will be, look to the stars. Remember that there is light and beauty up there that no shadow can touch. Remember that there have been dark days before, and we prevailed. There will be dark days again, and those too will pass. Because ultimately, the fate of this world is not in the hands of chance. It's not in the hands of pandemics or corrupt or crazy or problematic politicians. The fate of this world is in the hands of the author, the creator. And you want to know what he's like? Well, there's a lot of ways, but the first way, look to the stars. There's a gorgeous little moment, I'll shut up in a second, there's a gorgeous little moment in Lord of the Rings where Frodo and Sam are in Ithilien, and the shadow of Mordor, the smogs have already obscured the sun and made the world dark. And Ithilien was once a beautiful land belonging to the men of Gondor, and it's been taken over by the orcs. But But as they wander through it, they come to a crossroads where there once stood a statue of a good king on his throne. And his head has been knocked off, and the statue has been defaced and graffitied and smeared with filth, and the head has been left lying by the roadside. But as they walk past it, there's a moment when a shaft of sunlight breaks through the clouds and catches in these little flowering white and gold plants that have wrapped themselves around the brows of the head of the fallen king, as if in reverence to replace the crown he wore. And Frodo just turns to Sam, or Sam turns to Frodo and says, "Look, Mr. Frodo, the king has got his crown again." Frodo says, "They cannot conquer forever." And then the clouds move on and the light passes. That was a star, a moment of beauty. They cannot conquer forever. Coronavirus cannot conquer forever. Whatever the shadows may be, above all shadows rides the sun, and stars forever dwell. So do not say the day is done, or bid the stars farewell.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that.
You know, it strikes me too, Simon, that despair fails the test of rationality in Tolkien's world. You look at Denethor, who, as the steward of Gondor, he has a Palantir, and he's been viewing the designs of the enemy. All his attention is fixed on what the enemy's doing, and it drives him to despair. But ironically, he's declared defeat when there's an immense victory right around the corner. And, you know, Denethor burns to death, and he doesn't have to. And he tries to take his son with him. And so there's a sense I get from Tolkien, and I don't know if you get this too, where rationality and what is rational to do actually does, it might seem to depart, you know, it might seem that we're hoping in spite of all evidence. And yet at the end of the day, it actually comes back together, and actually despair is madness. And despair, like Saruman, right? Like when Gandalf says, "Tell me, when did the wisdom of Saruman the Wise turn to madness?" And he's not saying, "Hey, just be a fool with me, Saruman, and just hope for nothing with no reason whatsoever." It's actually Gandalf's firm belief as one of the Maya spirits sent by the Valar, and he actually knows there's reason for Estelle. And it's Saruman who's lost track of that and has devolved into a sort of madness that's his own undoing. And so just to bring that way down from Tolkien's world, like I see that in my own life with coronavirus, you know, and I know my vices tend to get the better of me in this long season of being trapped indoors, no travel, far away from family often. My vices get me when I lose hope, when I forget what this story's all about. But Tolkien is a good reminder to me that that's actually a symbol of madness, not of sanity. And that's maybe one final dig at George R.R. Martin. I can't resist it. I have to.
Nor should you.
because Martin wants us to be cynics, because he thinks that cynicism is rationality. And I think Tolkien forever is a resounding refutation of that idea, because, and not just from your optimism like we've been talking about, but Estelle, true faith in true reality, that's where rationality actually finds harmony.
I mean, it's easy to talk about rationality, but of course, what's rational depends on your starting point. What's a rational way to live in this world depends what you think the fundamental reality of this world is. If you're like, I think, Martin, and would say that this world has no overarching story, has no overarching meaning, has no creator, has no author, it's the product of blind chance and the struggle to survive, then I think the way he encourages, then cynicism is rational. Tolkien would say that's not how the world works. And I think Tolkien, rather than talking about rationality, would talk about wisdom and say that wisdom looks like folly to those who are not wise. This is, again, one of the big themes of Lord of the Rings. The whole plot, the whole plan that Gandalf and Elrond and the others come up with is we've been given the most powerful weapon in the world. Let's put it in the hands of one of the weakest people in that world and send him to walk into the enemy's stronghold with it. It's utterly dumb, except that it isn't. It's incredibly wise, because it recognizes the way the world works, that the great victories are not won by the powerful reaching for more power. They're won by giving power to the humble who are able to let go of power, and by being willing to destroy the weapons of power rather than grasp them and hold on to them. And so wisdom in Tolkien so often looks like folly. The great courage in many ways of Aragorn and Gandalf is not their courage to go into battle. Boromir had that. It's their courage to do something that looks stupid, that Denethor says is stupid. To put the ring in the hands of a halfling and send him to walk into Mordor, that's madness. Unless it isn't, unless it's the height of wisdom, because that's the way the world works. So the failure of Denethor, the madness of Denethor, is rational based on how he sees the world. The problem is that the world he sees is not accurate. It's a mirage that the enemy has shown him, because the enemy has made sure he only sees the reasons to despair and loses sight of the reasons to hope. There's a great line, one of the very few great lines he said snobbishly in the prequel trilogy to Star Wars. There we are, let's get that in there. Your focus determines your reality. Now, it's a throwaway line in that the films give no further significance to and entirely forget about. But it's kind of true. What you focus on determines what looks like reality to you. If you only fill your head with what you think is real, if you only fill it with everyday life, with the bus to work and the emails you have to answer and numbers, then to you that will be reality. And you won't dare to dream that there is anything more. And when the numbers come crashing down because there's a pandemic and the stock market is collapsing, then the world will have fallen to you, because your focus has determined your reality. Denethor's focus was only on the enemy, and therefore he fell. To rescue Theoden from despair, Gandalf had to lift up and open his eyes and show him something else. He had to make him look out the window, quite literally, and say, the sky is cloudy, but there's still a sun. And so, yes, I think it's easy for despair to look rational. It's easy for cynicism to look rational if you've got tunnel vision. But actually, if you open your eyes, I think Tolkien would say, and I would say, if you open our eyes to what reality truly is, then you'll find Estelle. So to sort of jump back a little bit to Xandra's question from earlier as well, this is why it's so important to look to the stars. This is why it's so important to lift up your eyes occasionally from what's right in front of you. Because if you don't, your focus will just narrow down to the things in front of you, the things around you, to this world, and that will feed despair. But lift up your eyes to the hills. There is more to this universe than your desk and your office, your house and your internet, and depressing stories on BBC or CNN or whatever you watch. Lift up your eyes and look to the stars, for hope is bright.
Well, I think that is a beautiful place to end. I want to thank you both for joining me and having this discussion on faith and literature. And we will pick it up again next week on this, our series discussing Tolkien. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Faith and Lit. Join us next week as we discuss Tolkien's views on creativity. See you next time, you book nerd you. Keep on reading and keep on looking for those stars.